The sky wept, as if mourning a tragedy no one else could see. In the middle of that storm stood a boy, no older than 12, clutching 2 newborns to his chest. Their cries pierced through the thunder, yet the world ignored them. Cars rushed by, splashing mud, their drivers too busy to notice the desperation in his eyes. He was barefoot, shivering, but he never let the babies slip from his fragile grip. And then a shining car stopped. Behind the window sat a billionaire woman. The woman inside the car was named Isabella, a billionaire whose name echoed in boardrooms across the world. She had built empires with sharp decisions, lived in mansions of glass and steel, and wore a life that most people only dreamed of. To many, she seemed untouchable, powerful, elegant, and immune to the struggles of ordinary people. Yet as she sat there watching the boy in the rain, something inside her shifted. The storm blurred her windshield, but nothing could blur the image before her. A frail boy, his skin covered in dirt, holding 2 infants, as if his own fragile body was the only shield they had against the cold. The baby's cries rose louder than the roar of the rain, filling the air with a helplessness that made Isabella's heart pound. She had seen poverty from afar, on charity reports, in photographs, during speeches at grand galas, but never like this, never so raw, so close, so real. Her driver asked if she wanted to move on, but Isabella couldn't. Something invisible held her there. A thought gnawed at her mind. Who was this boy? Where were his parents? How could a child be carrying children in the middle of a storm? For the first time in years, Isabella felt powerless. Not because of money, but because of something deeper. An ache she couldn't explain. She had everything the world offered. Yet in that moment she realized she had nothing that could silence the sound of those babies' cries. The boy stumbled closer to her car, his lips trembling, his eyes swollen from both rain and tears. And Isabella knew. This was no ordinary encounter. This was the beginning of a story that would haunt her forever. The boy's small frame shook as he stood in front of the car, his bare feet sunk in the mud. The rain didn't stop, but neither did his determination to keep the babies close to his chest. Isabella lowered the window, and a wave of cold air and wet earth swept into the car. For a brief moment, their worlds collided, hers of comfort and his of survival. The boy wasn't begging for money the way most did. His eyes did not search for coins or bread. Instead, they pleaded for something else, something far greater. He wanted to be seen. He wanted help, not for himself, but for the 2 fragile lives in his arms. Isabella's chest tightened. She gestured for her driver to step out, but the boy recoiled, holding the babies tighter as if afraid someone might snatch them away. Through the blurred storm, Isabella noticed scars on the boy's arms, old wounds, scratches that told stories of battles no child should ever face. His clothes were nothing more than rags clinging to his skin, drenched and heavy. And then her gaze fell on the babies. They were so thin, their faces pale, their cries weak and fading. Every instinct in her screamed that they were on the edge of life itself. Isabella couldn't look away. Her mind spiraled with questions. Where were his parents? Was he abandoned? Were these his siblings, or worse, his own children? The thought unsettled her deeply. She had lived in mansions filled with silence, rooms that echoed with loneliness, but she had never seen a child forced to carry such unbearable weight. The driver urged her again to leave, warning her that this was dangerous, that the streets were full of scams. Isabella almost agreed. After all, she had been taught her whole life not to get involved. But something in the boy's trembling stance, something in the way he shielded the babies, told her this was no scam. This was truth, written in pain. Finally, Isabella stepped out. The rain drenched her expensive clothes instantly, plastering them against her skin. The boy flinched, but she crouched low, leveling her eyes with his. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched on his face, the hollow hunger in his cheeks, and the sheer desperation that clung to him like the storm itself. Her heart ached in a way she hadn't felt in years. She thought about the charity dinners she had attended, where people raised glasses and made promises to fight poverty while dining on meals worth more than this boy would ever see in a year. She thought about her own loneliness, how money had filled her closets but never her heart, and she realized this child, this nameless boy, was carrying more courage in his fragile body than most adults she knew. Isabella ordered her driver to bring blankets from the car. She wrapped them around the infants, shielding them from the cold, and for a brief moment the babies stopped crying. The boy's eyes widened, as if he had just witnessed a miracle. But Isabella knew this was only the beginning. Something darker lingered beneath the surface. Children don't end up on the streets like this without a story, and that story was one she was about to uncover. Little did she know, the truth behind the boy's suffering would not only shatter her heart, it would reveal an injustice far deeper than she had ever imagined. As the storm softened into a drizzle, Isabella led the boy into her car. He hesitated, looking back at the street as though leaving it behind meant betraying something. Inside, the warmth wrapped around him, but his eyes still darted nervously, as if he had stepped into a world he wasn't allowed to touch. For hours, Isabella tried to get him to eat, to rest, but the boy's silence spoke louder than words. His arms never loosened around the babies. His gaze never strayed from their fragile faces. It was only when exhaustion overtook him that his story finally unraveled. He whispered fragments at first, each word trembling. His parents had died months earlier, victims of an illness that swept through their village. His relatives, instead of protecting him, saw him as a burden. At barely 12 years old, he had been cast out, along with his newborn twin siblings. Their mother had died giving birth, and their father never returned from the hospital. With the bus, no food, no shelter, and no family willing to take them in, he had become both mother and father, brother and protector, begging on the streets for scraps while shielding the twins from a world too cruel to care. Isabella's chest tightened with every word. She had spent her life believing poverty was a problem solved with donations and speeches. But here it was, staring her in the face, a child raising children, abandoned not just by family, but by an entire system that let them disappear into the shadows. Her heart broke when she realized the truth. The boy had not approached her car for money. He had stopped because he had run out of strength. His legs had given up. His body had collapsed under the weight of survival. In his silence, he wasn't asking for coins. He was asking for a chance to keep the twins alive. For Isabella, the world tilted. All her wealth, all her power, felt worthless in front of a boy who had fought harder for love than she ever had. And in that moment, she knew her life would never be the same again. The boy fell asleep in the back seat, his arms still cradling the twins even in dreams. For a moment, Isabella simply watched him, realizing that what she was witnessing was not just suffering, it was strength beyond measure. A child who had every reason to give up, yet chose to fight for two lives that depended entirely on him. She instructed her driver to take them not to her mansion, but to the nearest hospital. The twins were severely undernourished, their tiny lungs fighting for breath. Doctors rushed them into care, and Isabella felt a fear she hadn't known in years, fear of losing lives that weren't even hers, yet had already carved their way into her heart. Days turned into weeks. Isabella stayed by their side, funding their treatments, ensuring the boy had food and rest. For the first time in her life, her money was not buying luxury. It was buying survival, dignity, and hope. The boy, once silent and withdrawn, began to smile faintly when the twins stopped crying, and Isabella, once guarded by walls of wealth, felt something she hadn't in decades: purpose. When the twins finally gained strength, Isabella made a decision that stunned even herself. She took them in, not as a publicity stunt, not as charity, but as family. She became the guardian the boy had prayed for but never expected. For the first time, he was no longer just a beggar in the rain. He was a brother allowed to be a child again, while his siblings had a chance at life. But Isabella knew this wasn't just about them. This was about countless children left unseen, their stories untold. That night, she stood at her mansion's balcony and asked herself a haunting question. How many more children suffer like him, invisible to the world? She had spent a lifetime chasing wealth, but in the arms of 3 abandoned souls, she finally understood. True riches were never in what she owned, but in the lives she chose to save. And so the story ends not with tears of sorrow, but with a vow that no child should ever be left unseen in the storm.